My name is Sylvia Mae Turner. I'm 69 years old, widowed, no siblings left, no pets anymore. Though I sometimes still wake up expecting to hear the slow shuffle of my old beagle's paws against the wooden floor. My world these days is mostly quiet, filled with small routines and, until recently, the familiar chaos of other people's lives. I moved in with my daughter Caroline and her husband Aaron almost 4 years ago. It wasn't out of desperation. I still had a small pension from the public library where I worked for over 3 decades and enough savings to get by. But after my hip surgery, Caroline insisted, "It'll be good for all of us," she said. "You'll have company, the kids will adore you, and we can help with whatever you need." It sounded warm, generous, and maybe it was, at first. They lived in a two-story house in the East Heights neighborhood, not too posh, but newer than anything I'd ever owned. I was given the guest room downstairs, the one facing the backyard. It had a window with morning sun, which suited me just fine. I brought only the essentials: clothes, books, my tea mug, and one blue glass vase that had been a wedding gift from a friend long gone. There was no formal agreement, just family, just trust. And for a while, it worked. I cooked dinner 3 or 4 nights a week. I did school pickups when Caroline was running late. I swept, dusted, mended small things that tore. I became, not loudly, not pushily, part of the background machinery that made their lives smoother. I didn't ask for much. My own tea in the morning, a quiet half hour with my crossword, maybe some room in the fridge for my favorite fig jam. I was careful not to overstep, careful not to impose. I'd spent a lifetime learning the art of not taking up too much space, and yet, the strange thing about being helpful is that it slowly erases you, like when you clean a window so often that it becomes invisible. There were signs, small ones, that I had become something in the way, that the gratitude of the first months had turned into expectation. The small nod of thanks when I folded the laundry became silence. The thanks mom at dinner turned into, "Can you not use garlic? Aaron doesn't like it." And one day I noticed that Caroline had moved my teacups to a lower shelf, not in a kind way, but as if mine didn't belong with theirs anymore. Still, I stayed, not unhappily, not bitterly. There were good moments: bedtime stories with my grandson Eli, warm evenings on the porch with my knitting, occasional Sundays when Caroline remembered to ask me about my life before them. I didn't want much more, but the thing about aging is that people begin to speak around you, as though you're there for background atmosphere, as though your presence is appreciated only so long as it's muted. That's when it began to change, not quickly, not dramatically, just subtly. I started noticing pauses when I entered a room, that my suggestions, gently offered, were brushed aside, that decisions were made without me, even if they affected me. And still I thought, this is life. People are busy, people are tired. Don't be so sensitive, Sylvia. Until one evening, around the long table set for an ordinary Wednesday dinner, everything clicked. Aaron had made spaghetti, one of the few dishes he prepared without Caroline's help. I had offered to make the garlic bread, but was politely told, "We've got it covered." Caroline poured wine. The kids were laughing about something I didn't quite catch. I smiled, as I always did, content to be a small island in their bustling sea. Then Aaron looked up, mid-chew, and said casually, almost kindly, "You can stay, of course, but please don't get involved." Caroline didn't look shocked. She didn't frown or wince. She just nodded and said, "We just want a little more space. You understand?" And there it was. I wasn't being asked to leave. I was being asked to vanish. I set down my fork gently. I didn't make a scene. I didn't ask questions. I simply nodded slowly, as though they had offered me another cup of tea. But something inside me, something old and solid, quietly shifted. I realized they hadn't kicked me out. No, that would have been easier to face. Instead, they had turned me off, muted me, like a radio no one bothers to tune anymore. That night, when the house went quiet and the dishwasher hummed in the distance, I sat on my bed with a notepad. I began to make a list. What in this house is mine? The cup, the scarf, the blue vase, and the rest. That was mine too once, just in ways they had long forgotten. But I hadn't. The day after that dinner, the one with the spaghetti, the one with the sentence, everything in the house was exactly the same. And yet I wasn't. The morning began like any other. Caroline was in a rush, half dressed and searching for her phone charger. The boys were fighting over who got the cereal box first. Aaron was muttering something about a late Zoom call. I stood at the counter, waiting for the kettle to boil, my hand resting on the worn handle of my mug, the one that said, World's Quietest Librarian. Morning, Mom, Caroline said, brushing past me without eye contact. Morning, I replied. My voice was even, maybe too even. It didn't matter. No one noticed. I poured my tea, buttered a slice of toast, sat in the corner by the window, as I always did. They all moved around me, never really looking at me, not unkindly, but with the same inattentiveness you give to a piece of furniture you've walked around 100 times. The night before had left a strange aftertaste. I hadn't slept much. I'd replayed Aaron's words in my mind, examining every tone and pause like I used to scan footnotes. You can stay, but please don't get involved. Not rude, not cruel, just definitive. It was Caroline's nod that haunted me more, the absence of hesitation, the unspoken agreement. I thought back on our relationship, mother and daughter, best friends once. She used to call me about everything, college stress, first apartment, baby troubles. I used to be her sounding board, her anchor, and now she was nodding along to my erasure. After breakfast, the boys left for school, and Aaron went upstairs for his meeting. Caroline lingered in the kitchen, stirring yogurt into a bowl of fruit. I wiped the counter next to her, slowly, deliberately. I don't know what I was hoping for. Some kind of acknowledgement? A follow-up? Instead, she said, Oh, by the way, can you pick up Eli from his chess club on Friday? I might be late from work. I turned to her. Of course, I said. She smiled, briefly, then back to her fruit. And I realized they didn't think they'd done anything wrong. To them, that dinner conversation wasn't even a moment. It was just a small administrative update, a boundary politely defined. I wasn't being punished or blamed. I was just being minimized. That afternoon, I went into my room, closed the door, sat down in the chair by the bookshelf. The list I'd started last night lay on the desk. It read, blue mug, scarf, glass vase, I added, toothbrush, my sewing kit, 2 framed photos, Caroline at 6, my wedding day, old jewelry box with a broken clasp. And then, without much thought, I wrote, house deposit, first mortgage payment, down payment for their second car, emergency child care for 3 years. Because sometimes the things that are yours don't sit on shelves. Later that night, when the house settled and all the lights dimmed, I stood in the hallway listening. Caroline and Aaron were watching something in the living room. I heard them laugh, something domestic, comfortable, entirely theirs. I returned to my room, opened my closet, took down my suitcase. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't plan revenge or speeches. I just opened a drawer and began folding my sweaters, because it was time to stop being part of someone else's life. It was time to start returning to my own. The suitcase sat upright in the corner of my room for 3 days before I touched it again. I went about my routine as though nothing had shifted, as though that one sentence, but please don't get involved, hadn't taken root and bloomed into something irreversible inside me. I cooked, I vacuumed, I read with Eli after school. I ironed Caroline's blouse when she forgot it in the dryer. I kept the same hours, wore the same sweaters, but something inside me had gone cold and clean, like a winter lake sealed in silence. Each night I returned to the list. It was not a dramatic act, this list making. It was methodical, almost peaceful. Every item I wrote was a small reclamation. What in this house is mine? The tea mug, the blue scarf with the moth hole near the hem, my grandmother's thimble, a pair of reading glasses, the silver tray Caroline never uses, a wedding gift from my sister, the potted ivy I nursed back to life on the kitchen windowsill. Some things were easy to mark as mine. Others were harder, less about ownership than origin. For example, the antique side table in the hallway, purchased with my library retirement bonus. The down payment on this house, covered when Caroline and Aaron's mortgage application fell through at the last minute, and I quietly wrote a check without a word of drama. The basement insulation, installed with the money I received from selling my engagement ring after Harold passed. Those things didn't have my name on them, not legally, but they were mine in the way roots are part of the tree no one sees. By the end of the week, my list had grown to 2 pages. I did not tell anyone, not because I feared they would stop me, because I knew they wouldn't notice. On Thursday, Aaron walked into the kitchen while I was drying dishes. He didn't say hello, just said, "Hey, when you do laundry next, can you not mix my socks with the kids? It messes up the pairs." I nodded. Of course. That night, I added one more item to my list. The washing machine, paid for in full with my stimulus check during the pandemic. By now I had moved from list making to gentle sorting. A few books packed into a box under my bed. Some winter sweaters folded neatly into vacuum bags. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't sneaking. I was preparing, calmly, slowly, the way a tree prepares for autumn. One morning, while the house was still quiet and I knew Caroline had left early for work, I took the car, my car, still registered in my name, and drove through a few nearby neighborhoods. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just air, light, possibility. I ended up in a part of the city I hadn't visited in years, near the old conservatory, rows of modest buildings, low walk-ups, corner bakeries, people going about their lives. A small sign on a bulletin board outside the bakery caught my eye. Studio apartment, clean, quiet, available immediately. The number was handwritten below. I memorized it without taking a picture. I didn't want to make anything permanent just yet, but I returned home lighter. That night I waited until everyone was asleep. The house made its usual sounds: the click of the fridge, the creak of the stairwell, the faint hum of the heating vents. I sat at my desk, picked up the phone, and dialed the number from memory. "Hello?" a soft voice answered. "Hi," I said. "I'm calling about the studio apartment." "Still available," the woman replied. "Would you like to see it tomorrow?" "I would." We agreed on a time. Noon. I hung up and sat still for a long while, phone still in hand. I didn't feel excitement. I didn't feel fear, just clarity. The next day, I arrived 10 minutes early. The building was an older structure, bricks weathered but sturdy. The stairs creaked in a familiar way. The door to the unit opened into a small room, no larger than the guest room I'd had for the past 4 years. There was a kitchenette, a tiny bathroom with beige tiles, and a window that overlooked a maple tree with gold leaves. "This is it," the woman said. "It's small but quiet. Most of the tenants are retired or students." I nodded. I liked the way the floor felt beneath my feet. I liked the way the sunlight landed on the far wall. "I'll take it." She looked surprised. "You don't want to think about it?" "I've done my thinking." I signed the lease on the spot, paid the deposit and first month in full. She handed me the key. It was light and warm from her hand. That evening, I stopped by a small home store on the way back. I bought a new kettle, a lamp shaped like a mushroom, two sets of linens, white, nothing fancy. I carried the bags back to the car and placed them in the trunk beside my grocery tote. When I returned to Caroline's house, no one noticed I'd been gone. Aaron was watching television. Caroline was in the backyard with her laptop. The boys were arguing about a video game. "Did you grab eggs?" Caroline asked as I walked in. "Yes," I said. "They're in the fridge." "Thanks." That was all. In the following days, I began transferring things, piece by piece, to the new apartment. The books I cared most about, my teacup wrapped in an old scarf, the photo of my parents from their engagement, the blue vase. I made the move in soft intervals, a few items in my tote bag each morning. I told them I was walking, doing errands, going to the library. No one questioned it. In a house where you're seen but not heard, invisibility becomes a gift. I bought a small toaster oven, a cutting board, a broom. One afternoon, I opened an account at a bank near the studio, closed my old one, transferred my pension check. On a cold Saturday morning, I bought a bundle of cinnamon sticks and placed them in a bowl by the window. When the heat kicked in, the whole room filled with warmth. No one had said another word about the dinner conversation. No one asked why I had grown quieter, why I no longer sat at the table during meals, why I stopped offering to babysit. The silence grew comfortably, like ivy over a fence. 2 weeks later, the final pieces were packed. My clothes, my toiletries, the last book on my nightstand. I left no note, no list, no schedule. I did not announce my plan or ask for permission. I simply placed a single folded napkin on the kitchen counter. In neat, careful handwriting, I wrote, "Thank you for your hospitality. No more meddling." Then I took my coat, my purse, and my keys. And I left. No one saw me go. No one called out. I closed the front door with the same softness I had carried in my heart for years. And with that, I disappeared. The studio apartment was not beautiful. It was not spacious or modern. It didn't smell of jasmine or cedar or whatever aroma magazines say makes a home. It smelled like blankness, dust, a bit of old paint. But it was mine. I stood in the center of the room that first evening, still wearing my coat, purse on my shoulder, and looked at the space not as it was, but as something waiting. Not potential in the way young people think of it, not dreams or ambitions or things yet to build, just the quiet relief of enough. There was a moment, 5 minutes, no more, when I sat on the bare mattress and felt grief. Not grief like crying, but like a hollow echo inside my chest. The sound a bell makes long after the toll has ended. Not for my daughter, not even for the house, but for the years I had slowly, faithfully handed away. Then I stood up, took off my coat, began the work. I had brought with me only what I had planned. No extras. The kettle came first. I unwrapped it from a layer of towels and set it on the small counter by the sink. Then the mushroom lamp, warm, yellow, soft. I plugged it in, and for the first time, the room stopped feeling like a holding cell and started to glow. I laid the white linens on the mattress, crisp, uncreased, clean. No childish prints, no shared smell of someone else's detergent, just quiet cotton. The blue vase found its spot on the narrow windowsill. The framed photo of my mother went beside the bed. One teacup, two plates, two spoons, one sharp knife, a broom, a packet of black tea, and, from the bottom of my bag, a small cork board with two thumbtacks. I pinned up a note I'd written to myself the week before. A room of one's own is not a selfish act. Over the next week, I returned each day after walking the longer way home from errands. Not back to Caroline's house, but to my own. I kept my phone silent. If they texted, I didn't see. If they called, I wouldn't know. But they didn't, not at first. I spent that time filling the space with small usefulness. I washed the window panes, bought 2 more pillows, found a second-hand armchair in a consignment shop and had it delivered. It smelled faintly of lavender, or maybe just clean fabric. I read the news each morning at the small table, cooked myself lentils with carrots, made toast, ate slowly, with no one asking for salt or ketchup or more. I walked, a lot, around the neighborhood, to the corner bookstore, through the tiny city park where someone had chalked a hopscotch path onto the pavement. I did not run into anyone I knew. That, too, was a gift. I also stopped by the old library where I had worked decades ago. The outer facade was new, but the inside still had the same hush, the same mixture of paper and carpet and sun. A young woman at the desk asked if I needed help. I smiled, said I was just browsing. In truth, I walked those aisles like someone touching the edges of her former self, not out of nostalgia, but out of quiet realignment. On the third visit, I asked about volunteering. "Only 2 afternoons a week," I said. "Of course," the librarian said. "We'd be glad to have you." And that was that. I had something now, a place to go, a place where no one would say, "Not now," or "Can you take them just for an hour?" or "Please don't interfere." I bought a cinnamon candle and lit it each evening. It made the room smell like winter at home, though this home had no children, no husband, no daughter. Still, it held warmth. There were moments I imagined Caroline's voice, sometimes apologetic, sometimes exasperated, sometimes soft with regret. But they were all just echoes, sounds I had learned not to respond to. I had no need for revenge, no appetite for guilt. I did not wish her harm, but I no longer felt obligated to cushion her from consequence. I had given what I could: time, money, presence, and finally, the one thing they asked for without knowing its price: distance. They had said, "Please don't get involved." So I didn't. I unpacked, I arranged, I prepared, not for them, not for an eventual return, but for the ordinary, exquisite act of being left alone. And from that, I began to live. It was early, still dark out. The kind of morning where the air outside your window feels like velvet, thick with hush. I had always loved that time of day, the world before it wakes, before the voices rise, the keys jangle, the traffic starts. It had always been my moment. I just hadn't realized until then that I had been sharing it with people who had stopped noticing I was there. That morning, I woke naturally. No alarm, no school prep, no grandchild to rouse, no one to cook for or clean up after. I moved deliberately, without noise. I took one last walk through the room I had called mine, the guest room, the catch-all room, the spare. It was perfectly arranged, as if I had never been there. The bed made, the dresser empty, the closet stripped. Only the faint trace of lavender on the pillow remained, my scent, not theirs. I had brought everything with me already, little by little. The only thing left was the napkin I had folded the night before. I took it out of my purse, unfolded it on the kitchen counter, and smoothed it gently with the palm of my hand. In my neatest cursive: "Thank you for your hospitality. No more meddling." No accusation, no apology. Just the kind of note you leave in a hotel after the towels are hung and the dishes washed. The refrigerator hummed beside me. The kitchen was dim, but I didn't turn on the light. I knew it all by heart: the creak in the floorboard beneath the pantry, the one mug with the chip on the rim, the drawer that always stuck if you didn't pull it just right. I didn't linger, I didn't cry, I didn't even look around for a final time. I slipped out the door and closed it behind me so gently it might have been the wind. The walk to the car was silent. My coat was zipped. My shoes were sensible. In the passenger seat, a canvas bag with a wrapped loaf of bread I'd baked the day before, for myself, for no occasion, just because I had flour and time and the desire. The sun had not yet broken the horizon. The sky was soft gray with a hint of pink where it met the houses. I sat in the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine murmured to life. I did not look back at the house. I had already said goodbye, not in words, but in withdrawal, the slow, invisible kind that no one notices until it's complete. I drove the long way to my new apartment, through streets I used to walk when I was young, past the old bakery with the crooked door, past the bus stop where Harold used to wait for me when I worked late shifts. Memories didn't chase me. They simply walked beside me, quietly. When I arrived at my building, I parked under the maple tree, its last leaves barely holding on. I climbed the 2 flights of stairs with steady steps, key in hand. No groceries, no to-do lists. Inside, the apartment welcomed me like something earned. The soft smell of cinnamon still lingered from the candle I had left burning the night before. The blue vase on the windowsill caught the first pale light of morning. I boiled water, poured tea, sat in my chair, the one I had picked for its wide arms and low back, and looked out the window at nothing in particular. I didn't feel triumphant or victorious. I didn't feel regret either, only something clean and unnamed. Somewhere in another house, a napkin waited to be read, and I waited for nothing at all. I simply was, and for the first time in years, that was enough. The first call came that evening. I saw the name light up on the screen, Carolyn, and let it ring. I watched the screen until it darkened and the room fell silent again. No voicemail, just a small red notification. 10 minutes later, she texted, "Mom, are you okay?" I placed the phone on the table, screen down, and poured myself another cup of tea. The next day, there were 4 missed calls, a voice message, 2 more texts. "Where did you go? Are you upset? We didn't mean." It came out wrong. The voicemail was soft, hesitant. "Hey, Mom, it's me. Just, we saw your note. The boys are asking about you. Call me back when you can. Please." I didn't delete it, but I didn't replay it either. I went about my evening as usual, lit the cinnamon candle, opened the window for a moment of air, sat in my chair, and read. The phone buzzed again. I turned it off. By day 3, Aaron texted, "Caroline's worried. Just let us know you're safe. No, sorry. No, we miss you." Just a request for confirmation. It was interesting how quickly their confidence unraveled once I honored the very thing they'd asked for. I didn't feel spite, just clarity. They had made a statement. Please don't get involved. And I had obliged, not in anger, in precision. At the library that Thursday, I shelved books in silence while a high school girl hummed behind me. At one point, she dropped a stack, and I helped her gather them. "Thanks," she said. "You're always so calm." It struck me. Calm had once been my armor. Now it was just my nature. No one expected me to solve anything here, or absorb anything, or sacrifice quietly. I was just part of the furniture again, but this time by choice. A week passed, then another. Still no reply from me. Caroline's messages grew longer, more urgent. "You just left. No explanation, no talk. I didn't mean for you to feel unwelcome. It was just, things are hard. We're tired. We needed space. But that doesn't mean we didn't want you." The kids keep asking. Eli cried last night. I read them, all of them, but I did not reply, because there had been a moment to say those things, and they had used it to mute me. Now, silence was no longer a punishment. It was a reply. On a Saturday morning, I walked through the farmer's market alone, picked up pears, a loaf of bread, a small jar of fig jam. A woman beside me said, "I love this stand," and we chatted about recipes for chutney. No one knew who I had been or who I had left, only who I was, an older woman in a red scarf who paid in cash and smiled with her eyes. Back in my apartment, I put the groceries away, made tea, placed the jar of jam on a shelf where it would stay untouched until I craved it. The phone buzzed again. Mom, please. I turned it over, not to ignore, just to choose, because they had asked me to stay, but uninvolved, present but faded, useful but quiet. Now I was none of those things. Now I was absent, fully and finally. The word peace is overused, but there is no other word for what settled over me in the days and weeks that followed. Not joy, not triumph, peace, a low, steady thrum of okayness, the kind that doesn't need to be explained and would be ruined if you tried. My new apartment was the size of a hotel suite, if that, but every inch was mine. I walked barefoot. I left the kettle on the counter and didn't worry if it cluttered things. I played the radio quietly in the mornings. I hung a calendar on the back of the bathroom door. No one asked why. No one asked anything at all. I had spent decades listening for doors opening, pots clanging, footsteps approaching. Even in sleep, my ears had been tuned to the needs of others. Now, the silence wasn't empty. It was full, full of my own choices, my own rhythms, my own presence. No one barged in to ask me if I'd seen a lost shoe or where the insurance folder was. No one texted me from another room to ask what was for dinner. Instead, my days took shape like soft clay molded by my own fingers. Mornings were sacred. I woke with the sun because I wanted to, not because a baby cried or someone was burning toast. I padded to the kitchen in slippers I had bought with no one else in mind, thick soles, burgundy trim. I brewed my tea and sat by the window. That window became my theater, my meditation, my slow anchor to the world outside. I watched the same maple tree grow more bare by the day, until one morning it stood completely naked. It didn't look sad. It looked honest. I journaled. Sometimes I wrote one sentence, sometimes 2 pages. I didn't write about the past. I wrote about the now, about the way the light came in at an angle, or how the cinnamon candle smelled more like cookies when it was nearly finished. I read the paper, slowly. I underlined articles and sometimes tore one out and saved it under a magnet on the fridge. For no one, just for me. Afternoons often meant walking. I developed a circuit up 3rd Street across Wallace Avenue and through the park near the creek. I passed the same people most days, a man with a beagle, 2 women who always wore matching walking shoes, a teenage girl eating from a thermos as she walked to school. No one asked me who I was. No one needed to know. I visited the library 2 days a week. My shifts were short, 3 hours shelving, answering questions at the front desk. I wasn't needed there in a critical way. I was simply useful and appreciated. When I brought in banana bread one Thursday, they smiled like it was a gift, not a duty. I began recognizing regulars, a man in his 70s who asked for large print mystery novels, a boy with glasses who only read biographies of astronauts, a woman who asked me each time if she still owed late fees and always seemed relieved when I said no. On Fridays, I went to the community garden. I wasn't a member, but I liked walking past the rows. I introduced myself to a woman pruning roses, and by the end of the conversation, she had given me a bag of cuttings. I didn't have a garden, but I placed the branches in water on my windowsill, and they opened a little the next day. Evenings were the softest. I cooked deliberately. Nothing extravagant, but everything prepared with care. A soup that simmered for hours. Pasta with browned butter and sage. Toasted bread with goat cheese and honey. I set the table for one and used a cloth napkin. I played music, sometimes jazz, sometimes nothing at all. I ate slowly, not to savor, but to remember. This is for you. Sometimes I watched a film, not to pass the time, but to be with it. I had no one to shush, no one scrolling beside me, no one interrupting with questions or phone calls. If I paused the film, it was only because I wanted to refill my tea. Other nights, I didn't even turn on a screen. I knit. I listened to the creaking of the radiator. I looked out the window as the sky faded from purple to black. And I slept. Not just closed my eyes kind of sleep, but full, uninterrupted, real sleep. Sleep that heals. It took me a while to realize I hadn't thought about my daughter in 3 days, then 4, then a week. When the thought finally did come, it wasn't sharp, just a flicker. I wondered what the boys were doing, if they had started basketball again. I wondered whether Caroline had noticed that the drawer liners in the kitchen were all replaced by me 3 months ago, whether they missed that I used to leave the light on over the stove at night. I didn't feel resentment, only distance. The way you feel about a street you used to live on. You remember the sound of it, the traffic patterns, the uneven crack in the sidewalk. But you don't walk there anymore, and you don't miss it. One Saturday afternoon, I received a letter. It was handwritten in Caroline's blocky, rushed script. No return address, just my name and my building. It read, "Mom, I'm still not sure what to say. The boys ask about you almost every day. They miss you. I know I hurt you. I don't think I understood how much until now. Aaron keeps saying you overreacted, but I think he's wrong. I think I was wrong. You were always there, and I treated you like part of the wallpaper. It makes me sick to realize that. I won't ask you to come back. I won't even ask you to write back. Just know I think about you. Every day. Caroline." I placed the letter on the counter. I didn't cry. I didn't even sigh. I left it there for 3 days, untouched. Then I slid it into a drawer with the manuals for my toaster oven and the receipt for my chair. I didn't write back, because some silences are not cruel. They are complete. Winter arrived in earnest a week later. The air turned to glass. I bought a thicker coat and a pair of leather gloves lined with wool. At the library, I recommended winter novels to patrons who came in looking for something cozy but not too sentimental. I got good at that. One afternoon, I found a small slip of paper in a returned book. It had a quote scrawled in pen. "There are years that ask questions and years that answer." Zora Neale Hurston. I copied it into my journal because now I understood. This year was not a question, it was the answer. On New Year's Eve, I did not stay up until midnight. I went to bed at 10, after reading 3 chapters of a novel and drinking a cup of mint tea. I thought of Caroline for half a minute. I pictured her hosting, or attending, or doing nothing at all. I pictured Aaron in the background. I pictured the boys playing with their cousins. Then the image faded, like smoke rising and vanishing. And I slept. The whole night through. I woke to a new year, a new page, a clean kitchen, a full fridge, a small apartment that smelled faintly of bread and beeswax. The maple tree outside had collected snow on its bare branches. A pigeon sat at the very top. I made tea. I opened my journal, and I wrote, "It is a beautiful thing to be small and whole and unnoticed." Then I turned the page and began again. I don't know when exactly it happened. The shift from being someone who waited to hear the phone ring to someone who didn't check if it had. It wasn't sudden, no grand declaration, just a soft, slow unfurling of detachment. The world I had lived in, the one where I was always watching, waiting, ready to offer help, advice, a casserole, was no longer my home, and I wasn't exiled from it. I left. of my own volition. I had stopped participating in the performance, not out of anger, out of clarity. It had taken decades to become the kind of person who was asked for everything and expected to ask for nothing. But it only took weeks of silence to become someone else entirely. They didn't know where I was anymore. Not really. I hadn't left a forwarding address. I hadn't blocked their numbers either. But I didn't return the calls. I didn't answer the emails. I didn't explain. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I didn't need to prove the validity of my exit. I didn't make announcements. I made absence. It was a Tuesday when I passed by the park and saw a woman kneeling beside her stroller, adjusting the wheels. Her toddler stood behind her, wobbling toward the curb. I instinctively stepped forward, the reflex of a lifetime, but stopped myself. Another woman, younger, closer, stepped in and gently guided the child back. The mother turned and thanked her. I kept walking. It wasn't my role anymore. Not in anyone's life, not even as a bystander, and that was fine. My purpose now was smaller, quieter. I stopped reading Caroline's texts after the 10th message. They had turned circular, soft apologies followed by pleas, then silence, then guilt-soaked admissions, then irritation again. She was working something out, but it wasn't mine to manage. Every once in a while, I received a message from an unknown number. One was from her friend, Lauren. "She misses you, you know. Maybe just talk?" I didn't reply. Another was from Aaron. "The boys don't understand why you left. We said you needed rest. That's still true, right?" That one made me pause. They had reduced me to a story that made them comfortable. She needed rest. Not, she hurt us and quietly disappeared because we told her she wasn't to be part of the family. But I didn't respond. They didn't deserve the story. I began to take weekend trips, short ones, to nearby towns. I visited an old college friend in a coastal village. We drank coffee and walked the pier. I stayed in a small inn where no one knew my name. I brought a paperback and didn't speak to anyone for 2 days. On another trip, I took a train to a mountain town, ate soup in a lodge where children screamed joyfully in the snow outside. None of them were mine. None of them required me. That night I lay under a heavy wool blanket and felt the weight of a life with no one tugging at the edges. Back at home, my apartment became a sanctuary of non-participation. If a friend called and I didn't feel like talking, I didn't answer. If the library asked if I could take on more hours, I politely declined. If a neighbor knocked to borrow something and I didn't want to get up, I didn't. That kind of discretion used to feel selfish. Now it felt like breathing. I was not unreachable. I was simply unrecruited. I no longer performed usefulness, and strangely, the world didn't collapse without me. I started painting again, nothing large or masterful, just little things, watercolors of rooftops, ink sketches of hands, abstract blots of color that reminded me of my moods. I pinned them on the wall, let them fade, then painted more. One Sunday, I hung 3 small paintings at the local cafe's community board. 2 sold within a week. I used the money to buy a nicer set of brushes. No fanfare, just the gentle forward motion of a quiet life. In the mirror, my face looked the same, but it wasn't. Something in the eyes had changed. I had always carried a particular expression, alertness, readiness, something like apology. It was gone now. In its place, calm recognition. I had stopped intervening in my own erasure. I had stepped away from the machinery that had once relied on me, and instead of collapsing, it had simply replaced me with silence. Fine, I had done the same. I had built my own world where my silence was not absence, it was presence. A presence that no longer waited for a seat at the table. A presence that didn't apologize for being outside the door. A presence that stayed, finally, within the walls it had chosen. Mine. It had been more than 2 months since I left the house on Willow Lane, not in anger, not with accusations, but in the precise silence of someone finally honoring the boundaries set for her. 2 months since I became a ghost in the lives of my own family, a gentle erasure that no one was prepared to feel until it was complete. For a while, my days followed a slow, predictable rhythm: morning light, cinnamon tea, the library, walks, small errands, afternoons of reading or painting, or sitting quietly with my thoughts. Sometimes I saw other mothers and daughters in the street and felt something. Not envy, not longing, just a twinge, like the memory of an old injury when the weather changes. But as autumn turned toward winter, the rhythm changed. My absence, which had been at first a matter of quiet routine, began to echo back. The world doesn't tolerate voids for long. Eventually, people try to fill them, even if only out of habit, guilt, or confusion. The first time Caroline came to the building, I was at the market buying vegetables. When I returned, there was a card slipped under my door. Plain, her handwriting: Mom, please call, or at least let me know you're safe. Love, Caroline. I set it on the table and didn't move for a long time. In the old days, I would have called her that night, would have soothed her with reassurances, would have tried to minimize her discomfort. But I was done doing the emotional labor for everyone else. I made dinner. I ate slowly. I read, then slept. 3 days later, she came again. This time, I was home. I saw her silhouette outside my window, standing on the walk, shoulders hunched against the wind. She rang the bell twice, waited. I sat very still in my armchair, barely breathing. The kettle hissed behind me. She left a package on the doormat, a scarf I had knitted for Eli, folded with a note. He misses you. We all do. Please. Still, I didn't answer. I wasn't being cruel. I was being faithful to the new contract we'd all signed, the one where I no longer got involved. A week passed. My phone rang one morning. Caroline again. I didn't pick up, but this time she left a message. Hi, Mom, it's me. I know you're there, or I hope you are. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I really am. I know we hurt you. It was never supposed to be like that. I keep thinking about all the things you did, not just for me, but for the boys, for Aaron, for the whole house. It feels emptier without you. We're all rattling around trying to keep things together. I know I can't fix it, but if you ever want to talk, or if you ever want to come home, or just visit, please. The door's open. I love you. I listened, twice, then deleted it. It wasn't anger or pride, just a deep understanding that some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. That returning would mean erasing the self I'd only just reclaimed. Aaron called next. His voice was brisk, uncertain, a little defensive. Sylvia, hi. Just, look, I know things got weird. Caroline's pretty upset. The kids, too. If you're upset, you don't need to be. We're fine. Just, maybe let us know you're okay. There was a silence then. Eli's been having trouble sleeping. Keeps asking when you'll come read him stories. South, anyway. Just let us know. I didn't reply. A few days later, Caroline tried again in person. This time, I saw her coming from my window and had time to step out for a walk before she reached the door. I walked the long way through the park, boots crunching on the last of the fallen leaves, past bundled children shouting over a soccer ball, past the old couple who always held hands, even in the cold. When I returned, there was no note, only the memory of her figure, still and uncertain, waiting for something that was no longer mine to give. There is a grief in letting go of the hope that people will understand you without words, that love alone will translate to respect, to inclusion. But there is a peace, too, in no longer waiting for that moment. The library became my haven. There, I was needed in measured, reasonable ways. I shelved books, helped people find resources, ran a small story hour for local children, strangers, not family, and the freedom in that was immense. Some afternoons I took the long bus ride to the art museum, walked the silent halls, looked at landscapes and portraits and abstracts, and found myself drawn to paintings that showed people alone, at ease in their solitude. One Sunday, I attended a poetry reading at the community center. A woman read a piece about choosing your own name late in life, about the power of self-declaration. I spoke with her afterward. We shared a pot of mint tea at the cafe. She told me about her grown children, the ways she loved them but no longer tried to rescue them from themselves. I listened. We traded phone numbers, not out of need, but curiosity. Time continued its quiet work. The leaves were gone from the tree outside my window. Snow began to collect in careful layers. I spent more time indoors, baking bread, learning to make soups from scratch. I painted. I finished knitting a blanket I'd started years ago, its colors bright and wild, not chosen for anyone else's taste, just mine. The silence in my apartment became not just a background, but a friend. I stopped feeling like I was missing out on noise and mess. I stopped feeling the urge to check my phone for apologies or invitations. Then, one afternoon, there was a knock. Not a tentative, guilty knock, a proper, ordinary one. I opened the door and saw Caroline, cheeks pink from the cold, holding a paper bag of groceries. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice small but clear. "I brought you some things. From the market. Bread, jam. You used to like that kind." I stepped aside silently and let her in. She placed the bag on my counter and stood awkwardly in the doorway. She looked around as if trying to gauge the temperature of the room, or of my heart. She spoke first. "The house feels different. It's quieter. The boys keep asking when you'll come over. Aaron? Well, Aaron says it's just a phase, but I know it's not." I poured tea for both of us. We sat, I listened. She talked about the kids, about work, about how the routines had changed. She tried in small ways to explain, not justify, not even apologize. Just explain. I let her talk. Finally, she looked at me with something new in her eyes. Not expectation, not demand, but respect, mingled with fear. "I know we said it wrong. I know we hurt you. I'm sorry, Mom. Really, I don't want you to feel erased. I don't want you to feel gone. I just want you to know you matter." I nodded. I smiled, a small, real smile. "I know, Caroline. That's why I left quietly." We sat together a while longer. When she left, I walked her to the door. She paused on the threshold. "Will you come visit us? Sometime?" "Maybe," I said. "Not yet." She nodded. She understood, or began to. When the door closed, the apartment felt neither emptier nor fuller. Just complete. Just mine. For the first time in months, I slept without interruption. No dreams, no noise, just the steady breathing of someone who, finally, had nothing left to prove and nothing left to fix. And in that peace, I knew the world would not end if I was absent. It would simply adjust, just as I had. There's a myth, especially among families, that everything can be restored if you only say the right words, if the moment is tender enough, if everyone finally understands what was lost. But some things are not meant to be restored. Some silences are not a wound, but a closing of a door, not to keep out love, but to let in peace. I never returned to the house on Willow Lane. Not for holidays, not for birthdays, not even for the small milestones that once marked the calendar of my life. The boys' first day of school, Caroline's birthday dinner, the start of spring when we always planted bulbs in the yard. Those traditions belonged to another version of me, one who was needed in ways that were never quite clear, but always urgent. I found myself at the center of new rituals, simple ones. On Saturday mornings, I'd go to the bakery and buy a single croissant, which I ate with my tea by the window. I read more books than I had in years, sometimes 2 or 3 a week. I started volunteering for the Literacy Council, tutoring adults who were learning English, sitting at round tables in church basements filled with fluorescent light and quiet determination. I was present in those rooms, but not as someone's mother or fixer, just myself. The apartment changed, too. It became layered with evidence of a life lived gently. Watercolor sketches pinned above the desk, ticket stubs from concerts I attended alone, a growing row of spices on the kitchen shelf. Once, I bought a pot of daffodils at the grocery and set them on the sill. They bloomed wildly, even in the shadow of winter. Caroline and I spoke on the phone a few times, always short calls. No tears, no demands, no rehashing of the past. Once she invited me for Christmas dinner. I thanked her, told her I had other plans. She didn't press. Aaron sent a few polite texts. The boys, growing fast, their worlds shifting in ways that didn't require a grandmother's daily touch, sent photos, a video of a soccer game, a drawing from Eli labeled Grandma's House, even though it was the wrong color and the windows were all in the wrong place. I replied when I wanted, not when I was expected, and with each small choice, I made a new story for myself. Spring returned. The maple outside my window pushed out new buds. On my birthday, I went to the museum and sat in the sculpture garden, letting the breeze play with the edges of my scarf. I felt no pang for the life I'd left. I felt only the soft satisfaction of having built a place where nothing was owed, nothing was expected, and everything I gave was chosen, not extracted. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about the moment Aaron had said it. You can stay, but please don't get involved. And how those words had felt so final, so reducing. But they had also been a gift. They had given me permission to step away, to redraw the lines of my own life. People talk about forgiveness as a singular event, a great turning. But for me, it came in fragments. The decision not to answer a call, the long walk home in the early dusk, the new routine of feeding myself first, the slow, persistent realization that absence, when chosen, is not a lack, but a fullness, that you can be whole, more whole, outside the places you were once told you belonged. I was never in their house again, but in my life, finally in charge. No one asked for more space. I gave it freely, along with the silence I would never return to again. And in that silence, there was no loneliness, only peace, only the quiet presence of myself, at last unencumbered. The world went on. The seasons changed. The stories of Caroline and her family continued without me at the center, and that was as it should be. I had not been erased. I had simply written myself a new beginning.